Well, hello everybody out there, and welcome to another episode of Movie Passion. Yeah, and after reviewing movies that are a little bit more on the serious side, like Hagazusa, Reign Over Me, Moon, The Zero Theorem, I think it's now time to review a lighter movie, a nice comedy, for example, and to be more specific, a vampire comedy. So in today's video, I want to take a closer look at what do we do in the dark. What? No, sorry, I got that wrong. What we do in the shadows. Sometimes I get a little bit confused with that. Yeah, what we do in the shadows. It's not just your typical vampire comedy, like Dracula, Dead but Loving It. This is actually also the very first vampire mockumentary. So this is kind of like Trailer Park Boys, only with vampires instead of low-life criminals. So you have those four vampires that are living together in this house, and then you have a camera crew that is following them around and documenting their daily life. So, what are the vampires that we have in this movie? For example, the interesting thing about those vampires that we have is that they all reflect other vampires from famous vampire movies. So, the oldest one that we have is Peter, and Peter is apparently 8,000 years old, and he is analogous of Count Orlok from Nosferatu, and he's a really weird and strange character. He basically only lives in the basement in this, I don't know, can you actually call it a sarcophagus? It's this thing entirely made of stone, and he also seems to be void of any personality or anything like this. So he's a really, but I still think that he's a really funny character. Just the way how he stares is, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I really like this character. Um, then next we have Vladislav, who is 862 years old, and he is comparable to Gary Oldman's Dracula from the movie Bram Stoker's Dracula. But the interesting thing is that he also calls himself Vlad the Poker, and this is obviously a reference to the real life character Vlad Dracula or Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Third, who has been kind of like the inspiration for Dracula and a lot of other vampire stories. And he is also being referred to as Vlad the Impaler because he is known for impaling his enemies. So, yeah, Vlad the Poker is a reference to Vlad the Impaler. Then the next person that we have is Viago. He is 379 years old, and he's basically kind of like Lewis from Interview with the Vampire. And he also has kind of like this love interest, or he has the big love of his life, basically, which is Catherine. And yeah, he wanted to follow her all the way to New Zealand. And when he got there, he basically found out that she already found somebody, so she's already in love with somebody. And he thought about killing this guy, but then he decided not to because he saw how happy she was with this guy. So he waited and waited, but now she's old and her husband apparently passed away. So he decided, okay, what the hell? let's just go for it, let's just be together. So he decided to turn her into a vampire at the end of this movie. Yeah, it's really funny when he says, well, there is also like this big age difference between us, and people always think, well, what does this 96-year-old woman want with a guy 4 times her age? But yeah, it's a really funny thing. And it's also funny that when she was younger, she gave him like this necklace with a picture of her inside. But apparently, this necklace was made of silver, pure silver. And yeah, there's this problem that vampires can't really wear silver. So yeah, but it's a really nice, funny thing. And then we also have Deacon, who is 183 years old, and he basically is kind of like David from Lost Boys, and he also is the only vampire in this whole movie who has a familiar. And this familiar is a woman named Jackie. So she does all the chores, and she's also responsible for bringing over virgins that the vampires can feast off. And yeah, she kind of screwed up a little bit because she also brought in people who turned out not really to be virgins. And one of those persons is Nick. And Nick also got turned into a vampire. He is getting turned into a vampire by Peter. And yeah, Nick is also a vampire then, and he is kind of reminiscent of Edward from Twilight. So he is kind of like this young vampire, this rebel in a way. And the problem is that he is bragging about being a vampire. And this is something that you should definitely not do. You should never tell anybody that you are a vampire or that vampires are real. And yeah, in this one bar, he meets a guy and he says, "Well, hey, I'm a vampire." And then this guy says, "Well, that's a coincidence because I'm a vampire hunter." And of course, Nick doesn't really believe him, but as it turns out, he actually is a vampire hunter. And this also causes a lot of problems, and also a lot of problems for Nick. And yeah, this is. But I don't want to spoil too much. I don't want to spoil anything. I don't want to say what kind of problems it causes. But yeah, there are a lot of problems. Then there's also the thing when Nick is a vampire, he wanted to be with the other vampires, but he also brought a human to the house, which is something that you shouldn't do. But yeah, he brought his friend Stu. You know, usually the vampires aren't really too pleased with the idea of a human being there all the time, but they started to like Stu quite a lot because Stu knows a lot about technology and computers and stuff like that. So he can contribute something, and they started to really like him. But the thing is, the things that he is explaining to those vampires, those are things that Nick could have also explained to them. I mean, he's not really programming anything, he's just showing them how a computer works and how the internet works. I mean, those are things that Nick should definitely know as well. And he also shows them cell phones and digital cameras, and especially digital cameras. They are like a very big important thing for vampires apparently, because as you may know, vampires don't really have a reflection. So when vampires want to go out, they don't really know how to dress because they don't have a reflection. They don't really see what they look like in their clothes. And they came up with this weird idea of drawing pictures of each other so that they can show each other what they look like. But yeah, now that they have Stu and digital cameras, they can actually see what they look like. So they just take pictures instead of drawing pictures. So yeah, it's a very funny thing. But here's the thing. Somebody mentioned, or there are some people that actually mentioned that objects that vampires touch, they are still visible. They still have a reflection. So shouldn't the same thing also apply to their clothes so that they can actually see the clothes in the mirror? But even if that would be the case, you would only know what the clothes looks like. You can only tell, oh, this clothes is dirty, or you can see if the clothes fits together or if it matches, but you don't really know what you look like in this clothes. So yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. Then there is also this funny thing that apparently vampires can't go in to a building unless they are being invited. But those vampires, they also want to go out, they want to go into clubs. But the problem is you can't go into a nightclub unless you are being invited. So they always have those arguments with the bouncers. So they try to get the bouncers to invite them into the club, but they don't really understand it. They don't really know what it is that those vampires want or what they want. They don't know that they are vampires, but they don't know what they want. So they always say things like, well, if you want to go in, you can go in. But that doesn't count as an invitation. So yeah, it's kind of difficult for vampires to go to nightclubs. But then again, we can see that they also go shopping. We can see the scene where Nick is bragging about being a vampire to the clerk, to the convenience store clerk. So the question is, how did they get into this convenience store? We can see in the background, we can see that there is Stu. So I don't know, Stu is a human. So is it enough for a human to go in and then invite the vampires in, even if that human doesn't really own this place? I don't know, but it's kind of weird when you think about it. But yeah, those are some of the things. So all in all, it's a really nice, fun, and entertaining movie. And there is obviously a lot more stuff going on. So, for example, there is also the beef between the vampires and the local werewolves. And I find it interesting that the werewolves, they always try to behave better than the vampires. So they also say things like, hey, we are werewolves, not swearwolves, and stuff like that. But yeah, it does get really intense when they meet each other, especially at the second time. And then there is also this thing where the vampires are getting an invitation for this unholy masquerade, which is kind of like an annual gathering of all the vampires and witches and demons and zombies and banshees and whatsoever, but no werewolves. I don't know why they are being excluded, but yeah, that's the way it is. And of course, it becomes very problematic because Nick is also there and he invited Stu, but it's not really allowed to bring a human to this party, to this masquerade, especially if you don't let other vampires feast of him. And the guest of honor is somebody that Vladislav refers to as the Beast, which is basically just another name for his ex. So this is also very fun and interesting. And yeah, it's a really nice and funny movie, and you definitely have to watch this movie if you like vampires. Definitely. Um, so now about the interesting things, the interesting details. So, for example, when we can see the house where they live from outside, that house actually used to be the office of Peter Jackson. So that's an interesting thing. And also the movie, I mean, it's a movie from New Zealand, and it actually didn't do so well when it first came out in New Zealand. And that's why they also canceled the screening in the US. But then they started this Kickstarter campaign, and then they apparently raised enough money to also uh, distribute the movie in the US. And as far as I know, this movie also became the most pirated movie of 2014. I don't know how you actually determine something like this. Where do you get the numbers of how often a movie has been pirated? I don't know. I also don't know if this only applies to New Zealand or to the US. But yeah, that's also a very interesting thing. But I think the most interesting thing about this movie is the amount of footage that they actually filmed. I think this movie is in total something like 85 minutes long or something like that. But they actually shot a total of 125 hours of footage. Yes, you heard right. Hours, not minutes, hours. And this is really crazy. And as far as I know, they also improvised a lot of things, and they tried a lot of things that weren't scripted. So yeah, that's really crazy, and it would be really nice and interesting to see those 125 hours. I don't know if they will ever release this, but as far as I know, you can't really find it anywhere. And as far as I know, they also wanted to make a second movie about werewolves, and I think the movie was supposed to be called We Are Werewolves. But as far as I know, this never happened. This thing is like in development hell. So yeah, and of course, I can't talk about the movie without also mentioning the TV series, What We Do in the Shadows. Um, of course, the TV series features other vampires, so it's not the same vampires from the movie, unfortunately. And the vampires from the TV series, they also don't really represent other famous vampires from famous vampire movies. So they are kind of quote unquote original vampires. Um, but yeah, it's also a really nice and funny TV series. It's not exactly the same as the movie. I think the movie really feels more like a documentary. So in a way that the TV series, it is also supposed to be a mockumentary, but it doesn't really look or feel like it. I mean, there were times where I watched the series and I thought, hey, why is the camera so shaky? Why does the camera has to be so shaky? And then I remembered, oh yeah, it's because it's supposed to be a documentary. I totally forgot about it because it just didn't look like it for some reason. I don't know what it is, if it's the picture quality or the lighting or whatever it is, but it just I just totally forgot that it's supposed to be a mockumentary. Um, and what I also find interesting is that the TV series also introduced a new kind of vampire, because there is this character called Colin Robbins, and he is a so called energy vampire, which means that he, instead of sucking blood, he is actually sucking out the energy of humans, of people, and he does that by boring those people with very boring conversations. But not only that, he can also feed off negative energy. So that's why he also does things to annoy people and to make people angry. So yeah, it's a very funny and interesting TV series, and I can also only highly recommend about it. I can also only highly recommend it. I don't know if I will also make a separate video about it. We will see. As of right now, I only want to focus on movies and not so much on TV series or TV shows. But maybe I will do that in the future as well. So yeah, that's it. I hope you like this video. And if you want to see more videos, check out my channel. There is an entire playlist of my movie passion movie reviews, but I also have a lot of other videos like watch reviews and videos about mini discs and mini disc devices and flip clocks and lava lamps and all kinds of different things. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next video. Bye.